Okay, it looks like we're live. Okay, so we're going to get started. Let me know in the chat if there's any issues with the audio. I just came back from my summer vacation like a week and a half ago, and haven't gotten back into the routine yet. I was pretty tired and also working through some emotional heaviness as well. And it came on really I'm going to just assume that the audio is okay, and we'll just proceed. Yeah, so I was dealing with some emotional heaviness after I got back from the summer vacation. Okay, yeah, you had to turn up the volume a lot. Okay, let's see. Sorry if that made it worse. Is the audio better now? Much better. Okay, right. It's been a while since I did the last live stream, and I didn't quite remember exactly how I did it. Okay, let me know if there's any other issues. Yeah, thank you so much, Ravina, for your feedback. So we're going to jump right into it now that the technical issues are sorted. So in the last two live streams, we're talking about intergenerational trauma and looking at the experiences of a therapist who was using Jungian methods and was using dream interpretation. So this is somewhat related to that in that we're looking at Carl Jung's book from 1930, where he's talking about dream analysis. And this is interesting because he uses the dream analysis as a gateway to understand the unconscious. And as we'll discover as we get into reading it, that the unconscious, according to how he describes it, affects our conscious waking daily life. And causes us to behave in ways that we don't necessarily expect. Or let's say we're trying to make a new habit and that can affect us in that way. Or there can be anxiety, psychological disturbances. You're having trouble with various aspects of your life. And of course, when we are not struggling, we're not too interested in this. And we're primarily concerned about this more when we're struggling with an issue. I would say that dream analysis is not the only gateway to the unconscious. We can also see the unconscious through our habitual thoughts, the habitual thoughts that arise in our mind, through our emotions. Emotions are trickier, but through processing emotions, sometimes after processing emotions, then the understanding of where that emotion is coming from can arise in consciousness. Because if you've got beliefs, paradigms that are leading and creating these emotions that are arising that you're feeling, but you don't understand why you're feeling them, if you allow yourself to feel those emotions, it will allow the underlying beliefs and paradigms to also surface as well. And you can heal those beliefs and paradigms through that emotional processing. A lot of the reasons why we have those beliefs and paradigms that affect us unconsciously is because we haven't healed that inner child, healed that emotional wound, and that's what makes it stuck there. And of course, healing emotional wounds, processing them, can be quite painful. And this is what I experienced in the past week. Really deep, heavy emotion that hasn't come up for me for a long time. And it disoriented me. And I was like, what is going on? And of course, the emotions and the paradigms that showed up and the belief systems that showed up when I was experiencing that, it was confusing, and I thought, is this real? And I was convinced by it for a little bit until I got through it. It took some time, processed it, cried a lot, journaled a lot, and then I realized, oh, okay, this is something else that I'm releasing. It's not going to feel like this forever, even though in the moment it does sometimes feel like it's going to feel like that forever. So dream analysis in its practical application. And Jung is talking a lot here about the debate about the unconscious and his techniques. Of course, he's pioneering his own work. So he was dealing with a lot of, there's debate about which methods were the best methods and which methods weren't any good. The use of dream analysis in psychotherapy is still a much debated question. Many practitioners find it indispensable in the treatment of neuroses and ascribe as much importance to the psychic activity manifested in dreams as to consciousness itself. So neuroses, in this sense, is any kind of disturbance that affects your daily life. So instead of a medical problem that you'd go to the doctor for, in this context, it just means an ailment that could be of the mind, emotional, something that's not going to be treated through medicine, like it's not a virus or bacteria. Others, on the contrary, dispute the value of dream analysis and regard dreams as negligible byproducts of the psyche. So Jung is arguing here that dreams are really interesting and important. Of course, I don't always write down all my dreams and analyze all my dreams, but I tend to use the method of looking closely at my thoughts and emotions and seeing what that is telling me about the unconscious. So even though I'm not using Jung's techniques here in my life, this is still relevant for me personally, this discussion around the unconscious that I find really interesting. Obviously, if a person holds the view that the unconscious plays a leading role in the formation of neuroses. That's really interesting. I'm going to read it again. If a person holds the view that the unconscious plays a leading role in the formation of neuroses, so we're struggling with something we don't know why, he will attribute practical significance to dreams as direct expressions of the unconscious. So basically, dreams being a portal to the unconscious. If, on the other hand, he denies the unconscious or thinks that it plays no part in the development of neuroses, he will minimize the importance of dream analysis. So this was written in 1931, so it's been almost 100 years since then. And we'll see there's some really interesting points that he makes that are really embedded in the writing that are still relevant today. So he talks about Karras, who formulated the concept of the unconscious, so he's referencing other people's work here. Kant, the immeasurable field of obscure ideas. And we're reminded that the idea of the unconscious is an idea. When we live our lives, we experience unfiltered reality, and then the psyche breaks down that reality, creates meanings, filters it through abstract concepts, like that map of abstract concepts that we have this map of reality in our mind that we interface with the reality outside of us that we create meaning from. And Leibniz, who worked with unconscious psychic activity, not to mention the achievements of Janet Flournoy and Freud. And of course, Freud and Jung were associates. After all this, the actuality of the unconscious, should it really still be a matter of controversy? So, and he says, I'm not going to defend the hypotheses of the unconscious here, because we're just going to talk about dream analysis. And of course, the idea of the unconscious is important if we're going to talk about this. Without it, the dream appears to be merely a freak of nature, a meaningless conglomerate of memory fragments left over from the happenings of the day. Were the dream nothing more than this, there would be no excuse for the present discussion. We must recognize the unconscious if we are to treat dream analysis at all, for we do not resort to it as a mere exercise of the wits, but as a method for uncovering unconscious psychic contacts which are causally related to the neuroses, or whatever you're struggling with, maybe anxiety or depression, maybe struggling with organizing and managing your stress or your life, and therefore of importance in its treatment. And he says, the attempt to analyze and interpret dreams is entirely justified from a scientific standpoint. And I'm going to skip over some of this. Of course, it's very wordy. We don't really need all of it. And he references the Freudian school, which is of the opinion that important therapeutic effects are achieved by throwing light upon the unconscious causal factors, thus explaining them to the patient and making them conscious of the sources of their trouble. And so they're referring to making the unconscious conscious, and then once it becomes conscious, then it becomes more understandable, you can work with it, and maybe you'll have less shame about understanding, why is this happening? And of course, if you're struggling with something, then there can be shame around it if you don't really understand why you're going through this. And so he goes on, there's more that he talks about here, and it's pretty wordy. And we have our first example. I was consulted by a man who held a prominent position in the world. He was afflicted by a sense of anxiety and insecurity, and complained of dizziness sometimes resulting in nausea, of a heavy head, and difficulty in breathing, this being an exact description of the symptoms of mountain sickness. And from what I understand, he's not at altitude, so it doesn't make sense that this would be a physical condition as much as one of the mind. He had an unusually successful career and had risen with the help of ambition, industry, and native talent from a humble origin as the son of a poor peasant. Step by step he had climbed, attaining at last an important post that offered him every opportunity for further social advancement. He had reached a place in life from which he could have begun his ascent into the upper regions when suddenly his neurosis intervened. At this point of his story, the patient could not refrain from that stereotyped exclamation which begins with the familiar words, "And now just when I don't know exactly what he means by the stereotyped exclamation, or maybe he's just saying that the patient is frustrated that, I made it here and I want to go further and I'm struggling with this. The fact that he had all the symptoms of mountain sickness was highly appropriate to the peculiar situation in which he found himself. He had brought with him to the consultation 2 dreams of the preceding night. The first dream was as follows. I am once more in the small village where I was born. Some peasant boys who went to the school with me are standing together in the street. I walk past them, pretending not to know them. I hear one of them, who is pointing at me, say, "He doesn't often come back to our village." So that's the end of the first dream. And Jung says no tricks of interpretation are needed to recognize and understand the allusion to the humble beginnings of the dreamer's career. The dream says quite clearly, you forget how far down you began. And this just occurred to me, I wonder if this sounds like burnout. We're familiar with the concept of burnout, and of course this is a much older example, but maybe the idea of burnout wasn't commonly recognized then. So yeah, maybe this guy just needed to take care of his mental health, and his body and mind were telling him, you gotta slow down because I can't handle the stress. And if someone is very disconnected from their emotions, like they're all in the mind, they're disconnected from their body, they're not going to notice the signs that their body is telling them. And maybe their body told them signs and they didn't listen. Yeah, the awareness about mental health is a very new thing. Here is the second dream. I am in a great hurry because I am going on a journey. I get my baggage, but I cannot find it. Time flies, and the train will soon be leaving. I've had dreams kind of like this, like I'm trying to get to a ski race and I can't get all my stuff together to get onto the van that is leaving to get to the race, and I'm all stressed. Finally, I succeed in getting all my things together. I hurry along the street, discover that I have forgotten a briefcase containing important papers, dash breathlessly back again, find it at last, and then run towards the station, but hardly make any headway. With a final effort, I rush onto the platform only to find the train steaming out into the yards. Yeah, this is a stressful dream. It is very long and runs in a curious S-shaped curve. It occurs to me that if the driver is not careful and puts on full steam when he comes to the straight stretch, the rear coaches will still be on the curve and will be thrown over by the speed of the train. As a matter of fact, the driver opens the throttle as I try to shout. Me too, I can't get ready on time to leave dreams. Oh, yeah. So the driver opens the throttle and the rear coaches rock frightfully and are actually thrown off by the rails. There's a terrible catastrophe and I awake in terror. So this dream took an even worse turn. Wow. Here too we can understand without much difficulty the situation represented by the dream. It pictures the patient's frantic haste to advance himself further still. Since the driver at the front of the train, the driver at the front of the train is the mind and the conscious mind. That's so interesting, because in here we can see that the unconscious mind is connected to the body, the wisdom of the body. And your body can, if you don't listen to it, your body can get sick. It can get illness. I was at a women's conference in my early 20s. And there was a speaker who was talking about burnout and how many of her clients, she had these clients who were women who were high achievers who would burn out by age 30. They would get cancer, they would get autoimmune disorders. Brutal. So that aspect of it is still a thing. Yeah. So the coaches behind him rock and finally overturn, and that's the neurosis that developed. It is clear that at this point of life, the patient has reached the highest point of his career, that the effort of the long ascent from his lowly origin had exhausted his strength. Yeah, sounds like burnout. He should have contented himself with his achievements, which isn't easy. And it makes me wonder, what was he driven by? Was he driven by an unconscious desire to maybe win the approval of his father? And that could have been channeled in an unconscious way into his career. Maybe, we don't know. We don't have those kind of details. But this kind of relentless pursuit of success to the point of burnout, sickness, it's often driven by this survival-based motivation. There's some aspect of it that is rooted in survival. I've felt this recently, this release of that desire to achieve, really hold everything together, having these really high expectations and holding on to achieving all of that yourself instead of releasing control over that. And it doesn't feel good if you're used to achieving, if you're used to being in control. That level of surrender can be really hard. And also, if your identity is tied to achievement, then, and you don't have an inherent sense of value and worth, yeah, that can be a lack of self-love, which maybe that lack of self-love can show up when you start to rest and it's like, oh, you're bad, and oh, you're not You're being lazy. Oh, and this is awful. Like, this is awful to heal from. It's so hard. And if you get sick, then you're forced to. Like, you can't work. So that's not a nice outcome. It's so much better to have that awareness that you need rest to be in tune with your body. And also heal wounds about not being valuable unless you're working a lot, unless you're achieving and striving. And the achievement and the striving always has to go more, has to go further. There's no end to it. So this guy is driven by his ambition to attempt to scale heights of success for which he is not fitted. Yeah, this is about ego. And like, the ego is always there, and it gets its tenterhooks in us through not having that solid sense of self, that solid sense of self-love, and it can just get its tenterhooks in there, and we can start listening to thoughts that revolve around the ego. Yeah, all about, your reputation, how other people see you, all this praise that you're getting, you're feeling so good about yourself, feeling on top of the world, and you just want to achieve more and more and more. I find this guy's example really relatable. Especially if you have a lot of opportunities in your life, then there can be a lot of pressure that you have to fulfill that potential. And that's a blessing of living in a first world country. You can also see it as a curse, but I see it as primarily a blessing. There's just going to be more that comes along with learning how to manage it. And we can go into that and talk about like individualistic societies, which have their flaws, and societies that are more community-based. Of course, in individualistic societies, we have all those opportunities, but we lack that community. And it's hard to develop that community for yourself. And we can see, like, even like the past few years, how that's become so much of an issue. Yeah, so back to the example, the neuroses came upon the patient as a warning. And so Jung didn't actually treat the patient, and the patient was not happy with his feedback, and then events ran their course in the way indicated by the dream. He tried to exploit the professional openings that tempted his ambition and ran so violently off the track that the train wreck was realized in actual life. The patient's anamnesis permitted the inference that the mountain sickness pointed to his inability to climb any further. The inference is confirmed by his dreams, which present this inability as a fact. Yeah, so that's a really interesting example of a dream that was highly relevant. I'm gonna have a little drink. Oh, that's funny. It's blocking out the water bottle. We here come upon a characteristic of dreams that must take first place in any discussion of the applicability of dream analysis to the treatment of neuroses. The dream gives a true picture of the subjective state, while the conscious mind denies that this state exists or recognizes it only grudgingly. So they're talking about the limitation of the conscious mind. we want reality to exist in a certain way and sometimes have trouble accepting when it doesn't match how we want it to exist. The patient's conscious ego could see no reason why he should not go steadily forward. He continued his struggle for advancement, refusing to admit the fact which subsequent events made all too plain, that he was actually at the end of his tether. When you achieve a lot of things and have really high levels of achievement, sometimes you need to take a break. I wonder if he also had unconscious beliefs where he started self-sabotaging, because that could play into a factor of it as well, because we don't have all the information. We don't know if it was simply burnout or there was other factors, because if he had unconscious beliefs from his humble origins, that might have limited him and caused him to self-sabotage. And we can see that, the ego will completely ignore the reality of the rest of what we are. And the more the ego tries to suppress all the facets of who we are, that it causes damage. When in such cases we listen to the dictates of the conscious mind, we are always in doubt. That's interesting, because so many people who are really stuck in their mind and have this ego and pride about how smart they are, they can get stuck really easily because they're blind to so much information that is available to them through their emotions, through their intuition, through the thoughts that show up in their mind if they pay attention to all their thoughts. If they slow down and listen to their thoughts. Yeah, and so Jung mentions here that why shouldn't this person achieve the highest levels of success? And that's part of the reason why he didn't want to believe Jung. He's probably thinking, you know what? I'm just going to ignore the people who say I can't do it, because that's gotten to me the point where I am now. At this point, the dream comes in as the expression of an involuntary psychic process not controlled by the conscious outlook. Maybe he had to suppress some things to get to where he was, and he was used to doing that, but it no longer served him. And so he came up against this limitation. Again, there's so much more that we could discuss here if we had more information. It presents the subjective state as it really is. It has no respect for anyone's opinions about how things should be. It simply tells how the matter stands. I have therefore made it a rule to put dreams on a plane with physiological fact. If sugar appears in the urine, then the urine contains sugar, not albumin or urobilin or something else that I may have been led to expect. This is to say that I take dreams as facts that are invaluable for diagnosis. So dreams can allow us insight into the causes of the issues that we're dealing with and give us insight about how to begin treatment. And in this case, the patient should be prevented from going full steam ahead. And this is what he tells himself in the dream. He tells himself. So we're facing different aspects of the self, or what we identify with, right? If I say myself, then what do I mean by that? We've got this conscious mind, the unconscious mind, and the more you identify with the mind, you can see the unconscious mind as this foreign, strange object and not recognize it. That's also you. Okay, so he talks about how sometimes the origins of the neuroses only appear at the end of the treatment, and it's not necessary to go deep into your childhood and find all the reasons why you're experiencing what you are for the treatment. He talks about the Freudian view, which emphasizes heavily that you need to be conscious of what happened in your childhood that causes you to be experiencing what you're experiencing now. And Jung says, well, that's not necessarily helpful for the therapy. We don't need to do that. And in fact, this can be dangerous because then we can be looking and looking and looking and try to find evidence that isn't there. And this is an issue when the therapist starts suggesting things, and there is a phenomenon where they can get the patient, I'm not sure if it's producing fake memories. I wouldn't say that because I don't think that's exactly what they're saying here. But the therapist can ask leading questions that influence what happens there. And maybe we'll see more about that going on. I read this while I was in my summer vacation. We were kayaking on the ocean, so I brought a Kindle and I was reading a little bit every day. So maybe I'm speaking from some of the section that we're going to go towards. Okay, so we've got another example here. Many dreams do not touch upon the causes of the neurosis, but treat of quite different matters, among others, of the patient's attitude towards the doctor. Oh, so there's 3 dreams of a new patient here. She consulted 3 different analysts in turn, and at the beginning of each treatment she had one of these dreams. Here is the first. I must cross the frontier into the next country, but no one can tell me where the boundary lies. I cannot find it. The treatment which followed this dream was unsuccessful, and was soon broken off. The second dream was, I must cross the frontier. It is a black night. I cannot find the custom house. After a long search, I notice a small light far away and suppose that the frontier lies over there. But in order to reach it, I must cross a valley and pass through a dark wood, in which I lose my sense of direction. Then I notice that someone is with me. Oh, this person suddenly clings to me like a madman, and I awake in terror. That treatment was also discontinued after a few weeks, the reason being the patient was completely disoriented by the analyst's unconscious identification with her. Oh. I'm not sure if the therapist was projecting, maybe wasn't being professional, or just hadn't dealt with enough of their own unconscious issues to deal with this. The third dream took place when the patient came into my hands. It runs, or this is when Jung is treating this patient. I must cross a frontier, or rather, I have already crossed it, and find myself in a Swiss custom house. I have only a handbag with me, and believe that I have nothing to declare. But the customs official dives into my bag, and to my astonishment, pulls out 2 full-size mattresses. The patient married during the course of her treatment with me, but not without a violent resistance to this step. I'm guessing that's, no, I don't have anything in my handbag, but there was something in her handbag. I'm assuming that the resistance that she had was to getting married. The cause of her neurotic resistance came to light, or maybe the resistance could have been against the treatment. I'm not sure. The cause of her neurotic resistance came to light only after many months, and there is not a hint of it anywhere in these dreams. They are without exception anticipations of the difficulties she is to have with the analysts to whom she has come for treatment. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, the 2 full-size mattresses. The symbolism of dreams is wild. Yeah, it's funny there's 2 mattresses and not just 1. So, in these dreams, anticipations of the difficulties means that the dreams anticipated the difficulties, which means the dreams had a predictive element. And if we want to talk about predicting the future, one of the things we can see here or can take from this is evidence that the unconscious has access to the future, which is so crazy. Jung is so interesting because he's so intuitive. He's funny. Like, some of his humor comes up in his own way in his writing, but like his depth of understanding of symbols is so incredible. And we're going to see this in one of the dreams coming up. But he saw that power, that potential that we have as humans, and that immense power of the unconscious, of things that we're not fully aware of. And it has this mystical, magical element to it, which is really, really cool. And doing this kind of work where you connect with your unconscious, where you might be doing healing work, you might be processing emotions, you might be journaling and looking really closely at the habitual thoughts that go through your mind. And this is an element of magic. This is like learning and practicing the tools of magic. It's like going to Hogwarts, going to an academy where you are learning how to listen to your intuition, learning how to access that wisdom innately within you, within the unconscious, within those depths and the unconscious can be symbolized as the ocean, like the deep, dark ocean, which can be kind of scary, but like, what can we find in there? Of course, Jung is super insightful that he recognized that this dream was referencing not the cause of her issues, but the situation that was happening with these therapists. It's like magic indeed. Loving the articles so far. I'll start journaling my dreams from now on. So cool. Yeah. Journaling your dreams takes a lot of patience. I don't have the patience for that. But maybe I should. Maybe. Yeah, thank you for that. That would be so interesting to see what you find. Yeah, I think I like this. I like this too. I thought this was interesting. It exceeded my expectations. Some of Jung's works are difficult to read. Yeah. So with this patient, Jung's interpretation of this dream, it disappointed her greatly, but she was distinctly encouraged to go on in spite of all the difficulties by the fact that it reported the frontier already crossed. I just think, wouldn't that be wild? Being Carl Jung's patient? Yeah, like, that would be so crazy. I would imagine that you would need significant financial resources and probably connections to be his patient. But looking back at it now, it seems, oh wow, that would be so cool. But of course, we'd have a recognition of the importance of his work. If nothing else, it'll be a good source of laughter for the dream journal. Yeah. Yeah, who knows? Maybe there's other options to explore in your dreams as well, like becoming conscious within the dream that it is a dream and then being able to control your dreams. I forget what that's called. Yeah, well, maybe you'll become a dream master, Ravina. And I wonder, because he talks about further on how there's standard symbols, and the standard symbols that we recognize are not necessarily, they don't necessarily mean the same things within our personal dreams. And I wonder, like, if there was a symbol that showed up within your dream over and over again that was personal to you, that it would mean the same thing and would reinforce the ideas. Lucid dreaming. Yeah, thank you, Ravina. That's it. Initial dreams are often amazingly transparent and clear-cut, but as the work of analysis progresses, the dreams in a little while cease to be clear. Well, that's... Oh, I forget the word. I mean, that's a little discouraging to know that it's going to get more difficult as it goes on. If they should prove exceptional and keep their clarity, we can be sure that the analysis has as yet not touched some important part of the personality. Okay, so here's why the dreams start to get complex. Because we're complex. As a rule, the dreams become less transparent and more blurred shortly after the beginning of the treatment. Interesting. So I wonder if, like, you know, Ravina, if you're going to be writing down your dreams, in a sense, you are taking the place of the therapist. Like in this case where you're becoming your own therapist and you're kind of distancing yourself from, yeah, what you're observing within yourself. Wrote down the video idea and the concept for a video on the importance of becoming your own therapist. But I haven't released that yet. We'll record it and release it soon. So it becomes increasingly difficult to interpret these dreams that hold this important information. A further reason for this being that a point may soon be reached where the doctor is unable, if the truth be told, to understand the situation as a whole. So, yeah, he's saying for most people, there is this point of not knowing, of not understanding. And maybe it is the point where we release that control of our desire for the conscious mind to understand, and we tap into that intuitive nature of the unconscious, because as we release that desire for control, we can tap into the unconscious mind. And in the unconscious mind, it arises rather than reaching in there. It's not fully within your control, within your grasp. And we already had evidence of the unconscious mind having predictive ability. And I'm going to say it's possible that the unconscious mind could also have access to understanding someone else's unconscious, which I'm going to say I think this is somewhat of what Carl Jung is doing here. And like, he understands the process well enough in himself, I'm assuming he does, that he knows that like this is the element of something magical and mystical happening here, that as the therapist, that he is accessing his own unconscious to understand the patient's unconscious. And later on he talks about how important it is for the therapist to be really good at doing what they want the patient to do. So they have to be a leader in that sense. And I'm going to assume that Carl Jung has really worked and looked at his own unconscious at a very deep level. Yes, that's the way you want to look at it, like a therapist. As if you're studying something that's not personal to you, then you'll be able to see things clearly, no stickiness. I love that. That is such a good way to say that. Yeah, I think I got lipstick there. That is such a difficult thing to do, especially if it's something that you're really emotionally tied to. Oh. But I guess as you become more comfortable looking at like the things that you're not fully aware of about yourself, you start to dig into them, that you become more comfortable with what you're going to find there. You become more comfortable with all the aspects of yourself. To say that dreams are unintelligible, or they don't mean anything, or we can't understand them, is a mere reflection of the doctor's subjective opinion. Nothing is unclear to the understanding. It is only when we fail to understand that things appear unintelligible and confused. In themselves, dreams are clear. That is, they are just as they must be under the given conditions. If we look back at these unintelligible dreams from a later stage of the treatment, or from a distance of some years, then we are often astounded at our own blindness. It is a fact that as an analysis progresses, we come upon dreams that are strikingly obscure in comparison with the initial dreams. But you shouldn't be too hasty of accusing the patient of deliberate resistance. Accusing the patient like you're messing up these dreams and making them too difficult to understand and analyze. I think that's what they mean there. I guess when they're saying confused, they mean like the dreams are muddled. So the patient would have a resistance to seeing what's in the unconscious. So they unconsciously muddle up the dreams, I guess. The therapist would do better to take the fact as an indication of his growing inability to understand the situation. So don't blame the dream, blame yourself. That's frustrating. What does this dream mean? The psychiatrist likewise is prone to call a patient confused when he would do well to recognize the projection. Oh, Jung is savage. I feel like he's calling these other doctors incompetent and that they're like, their ego is disturbed that they can't figure it out. It's like, if you would just be humble and be patient and let yourself have some time to figure it out, it'll come to you. Yeah, so there's a special meaning here for the word confused. I think it's a little different than what we usually use it for today. For it is really his understanding that grows confused in the face of the patient's strange behavior. Yeah. Well, I guess that's true, because we're talking about the unconscious here, and we're talking about the influences that we're not aware of that influence our behavior. And then if we don't understand it, we just say, like, that's really strange, which is really alienating to your psyche as a whole. If you're looking at yourself and you're just saying, like, why am I so strange? That's hard. Like, if you think about your relationship with yourself and you're judging yourself like that, it creates this like fission within yourself where you're not really allowing that compassion and understanding. What we really want is to become like this whole unified being. If you look at people who talk about non-dual experiences, and like there's different kinds of enlightenment experiences you can have, and one of them is of absolute love, or this non-dual love. And like, we all have neuroses. The thing is, a lot of these neuroses are socially acceptable. Like, we can get by in society with this level of neuroses. But a lot of it prevents us from experiencing this non-dual love. So outside of the realm of duality, where there's separateness, there's other, there is this space and realm where you can experience directly this non-dual love. So it's outside of hatred and anger, like happiness, sadness. And this is really like, those emotions are their emotions are really outside of it. And then there's this peace that can be found, like if you've got neutral states, and then beyond that, it just increases in intensity. Like people having a religious experience, that would be that could be like the non-dual state of love, and they're releasing the obstructions to experiencing that. And technically we can all experience that degree of love, and it's not the kind of love where like there has to be hate to exist for that love to exist. It's outside of that. Like, this kind of love doesn't need its contrasting opposite to exist. And what's interesting, like in the body, it self-regulates. So to feel emotion, oftentimes we need the contrast of that emotion. Like, those contrasts will amplify those emotions. But apparently this experience of this kind of love is outside of that, which is interesting. And a lot of that is what we are unconsciously yearning for and seeking. That level of wholeness. I forget what my point of that tangent was, how it relates. So we're back to the therapist blocks, where like the therapist might struggle with not being able to understand. And yeah, he mentions professional vanity that lays a dangerous trap for him. I was watching a non-dual teacher that said that there should be a mental hospital for the people that think they're a body. I guess from that perspective, that seems crazy, but it's socially accepted. Oh my gosh. We got really deep really fast here. I know, but if everyone's in a mental hospital, who's gonna take care of it, right? Oh, I guess, okay, as society's the mental hospital, I guess. Oh my gosh. By taking refuge in the doctor's self-confidence and profound understanding, the patient loses all sense of reality, falls into a stubborn transference, and delays and inhibits the cure. So, Jung is really quickly referencing here what he's going to be talking about in the next chapter, that the patient needs to connect to their own unconscious and start to integrate themselves. So it's not enough for the doctor to just be like, oh, this is what it means. Society's a mental hospital. I need a t-shirt. Oh my gosh. Oh. That seems like such a confrontational thing to like have a t-shirt on and just walk around with it. Oh, it makes me want that kind of t-shirt too. Right, back to the article. Understanding is clearly a subjective process. Yeah, so if the patient's not on board, then, and doesn't have this aha moment, and the therapist is just rushing ahead and like, yeah, and it's all about them like, oh, look at me, I'm so smart, then it's not gonna be helpful. I'd wear it every day. Yeah, t-shirt. Oh. It may be very one-sided in that the physician understands while the patient does not. In such a case, the doctor sometimes feels it his duty to convince the patient, and if the latter will not accuse himself to be convinced, the doctor accuses him of resistance. This sounds like a bad therapy session. Yeah. And Jung says, when the understanding is all on my side, I find it advisable to stress my lack of understanding. So Jung says, go the opposite way. It's like, you know what? I really don't know. And I guess maybe the patient will then offer solutions to try and help out the therapist. And then the therapist can add as like a guide rather than, oh, this is just how it is. It is relatively unimportant whether the doctor understands or not, but everything hangs on the patient's doing so. Yeah, well, Jung makes an important point here, is that the therapist or doctor might assume that the dream means something, which it doesn't, and that's why it's important to get the accord or get the patient on board with it, and for the patient to have this aha moment and be like, oh yeah, like that sounds right. It's important for the therapist not to automatically assume that they know what's happening, because the therapist could be projecting their own issues and interpreting the dream through the lens of their own unconscious issues. Yeah. Being a therapist is actually really, really challenging, or like, at least if we compare it to Jung's standards. Yeah, so the dream has to have the or the interpretation of the dream has to have the patient's assent, has to have their agreement with what that means. Okay, so he talks about if the interpretation is incorrect, it could cripple the actual development of the patient. So we appeal to the patient to help them grow in their own truth, their own understanding of themselves. And when you have reached the patient's heart, and this appeal goes deeper and acts with greater force, that's when it's really effective. When the doctor's interpretation is based merely upon a one-sided theory of a preconceived opinion, his chances of convincing the patient or of achieving any therapeutic results depend chiefly upon suggestion. Okay, so here's where they're talking about the suggestion. And let no one deceive himself as to the effects of suggestion. In itself, suggestion is not to be despised, but it has serious limitations and reacts upon the patient's independence of character in a very undesirable way. Or maybe this is different than what I was talking about earlier. A practicing analyst may be supposed to believe in the significance and value of the widening of consciousness, the procedure of bringing to light the parts of the personality which were previously unconscious, and subjecting them to conscious discrimination and criticism. So this is the theme of what we're doing here. Bringing to light the parts of the personality which were previously unconscious, and subjecting them to conscious discrimination and criticism. It is an undertaking which requires the patient to face his problem and taxes his powers of conscious judgment and decision. It is nothing less than a challenge to the ethical sense, a call to arms that must be answered by the whole personality. Therefore, with respect to personal development, the analytical approach is of a higher order than methods of treatment based upon suggestion. This is a kind of magic that works in the dark and makes no ethical demands upon the personality. Okay, so suggestion is a rather... I'm missing the word. The opposite of active. Passive. Suggestion is a rather passive approach. It's probably somewhat similar to if you listen to affirmations. Yeah. So there's some value in it, but you might need to go deeper. Methods of treatment based upon suggestion are deceptive makeshifts. They are incompatible with the principles of analytical therapy and should be avoided. But suggestion can, of course, be avoided only when the doctor is aware of the many doors through which it can enter. There remains in the best of circumstances enough, and more than enough, unconscious suggestion. So unconscious suggestion that the doctor is influencing the patient in an unconscious way, I guess. I'm going to read more. We'll see if he elaborates on this further. And I'm going to try and summarize this a little bit more, so maybe we can get a bit further before we're going to end this live. So the analyst has to find some kind of interpretation of the dream that resonates with the patient, especially if there's a lot of obscurity in the dream. And you can't necessarily rely on old knowledge. Every dream should be a new departure, a new source of information about unknown conditions concerning which he has as much to learn as the patient. Oh. So approach every dream with a fresh slate. Don't hold preconceived opinions. And there's boundless opportunity for pioneer work in this field. I'm sure there still is. The view that dreams are merely imaginary fulfillments of suppressed wishes has long been superseded. So he's saying there's still valuable information contained in dreams. It's not just what you desire happening. I mean, that's not a great view to have on negative dreams. That, oh, you had that dream because you wanted it to happen. No. It is true that there are dreams which embody suppressed wishes and fears. But what is there which the dream cannot on occasion embody? Oh, yeah, dreams can embody lots of things. Dreams may give expression to ineluctable truths, not sure what that word means, philosophical pronouncements, illusions, wild fantasies, memories, plans, anticipations, irrational experiences, so the mind trying to understand what just happened, even telepathic visions, and heaven knows what besides. One thing we ought never to forget: almost half of our lives is passed in a more or less unconscious state. The dream is specifically the utterance of the unconscious. We may call consciousness to the daylight realm of the human psyche and contrast it with the nocturnal realm of unconscious psychic activity, which we apprehend as a dreamlike fantasy. It is certain that consciousness consists not only of wishes and fears, but of vastly more than these. And it is highly probable that the unconscious psyche contains a wealth of contents and living forms equal to or even greater than does consciousness. Yeah, so there's a lot of information that we have access through the unconscious. Consciousness is characterized by concentration, limitation, and exclusion. So if you're doing manifestation techniques, faith, prayer, you are, like, he's saying, like, suggestion doesn't work. Like, whether you're trying to understand yourself or whether you're trying to influence your reality, that it has to include and affect the unconscious. Because the conscious is limited, and the conscious state can only see like a certain projected reality out in front of it, while the unconscious state has access to many possibilities and many realities. Yeah, so the language of a dream is a language that can be misused, and it is hard to realize how badly we are fooled by the abuse of ideas. It seems as if the unconscious had a way of strangling the physician in the coils of his own theory. Yeah. At the very least, dream interpretation in itself is a method of your own growth. Just of the sheer difficulty of interpreting dreams. I cannot prove in every case that dreams are meaningful, for there are dreams that neither doctor nor patient understands. But I must regard them as hypothetically meaningful in order to find courage to deal with them at all. It's interesting, like, Jung is the master at this, but he recognizes his own limitations. To say that dreams contribute in an important way to conscious knowledge, and that a dream which fails to do so is a dream which has not been properly interpreted, this too is a theoretical statement. So he's not for sure if every dream has meaning. But he's saying I should assume that it does have meaning in order to potentially gain useful information from it. Like when people pan for gold, we don't always know where the gold is. So sometimes you have to sift through and sort through it. There's effort involved that doesn't always get you gold. Some days you get gold, other days you don't. We must never forget in dream analysis, even for a moment, that we move on treacherous ground where nothing is certain but uncertainty. Yeah. Do anything you like, only don't try to understand. When we take up an obscure dream, our first task is not to understand and interpret it, but to establish the context with minute care. So what I have in mind is not a boundless sweep of free association starting from any and every image in the dream, but a careful and conscious illumination of those chains of association that are directly connected with particular images. So patients often have this urgent desire to understand and interpret, but he's saying slow down. You don't want to give associations in accordance with the theory. So I think that's interesting because if you're looking up dream interpretations of or symbols of dreams online and saying like, well, this means that, it's not necessarily the case. While there are universal symbols, that symbol in your dream might not adhere to the meaning of the universal symbol. Like the doctor, they wish at once to get behind the dream in the false belief that it is a mere facade concealing the true meaning. And he talks more about this false facade of the dream. We would do better to say that we are dealing with something like a text that is unintelligible, not because it has a facade, but simply because we cannot read it. So we just have to learn to read it. And he's saying, differentiating between belief about whether you can read that text versus just learning how to read it. Yeah, so he's talking about free associations that are great, but just start with the context of the dream. Keep as close as possible to the dream images themselves. So when a person has dreamed of a deal table, so little is accomplished by his associating it with his writing desk, which is not made of deal. I'm not sure. This is such a strange sentence construction. The writing desk, which is not made of deal. I'm not sure if deal means something else. And when I hear deal table, I think of like a playing card table, but maybe this is some kind of other table. If you say, oh, the table's made of deal, and how I understand it makes no sense. So this dream refers expressly to a deal table. If at this point nothing occurs to the dreamer, his hesitation signifies that a particular darkness surrounds the dream image, and this is suspicious. Okay, we're going to look deeper. We would expect him to have dozens of associations to a deal table, and when he cannot find a single one, this must have a meaning. So Jung is saying, don't go for the obvious ones. Go in the direction of obscurity, because you're trying to bring light on something that is hidden. I say to my patients, suppose that I had no idea what the words deal table mean. Describe this object and give me its history in such a way that I cannot fail to understand what sort of thing it is. Oh, so you're really relying on the person themselves. So if you're interpreting your own dreams, you're really looking inside yourself for answers versus trying to find answers externally. Every interpretation is hypothetical, for it is a mere attempt to read an unfamiliar text. An obscure dream taken by itself can rarely be interpreted with any certainty. So that I attach little importance to the interpretation of single dreams. With a series of dreams, we can have more confidence in our interpretations. For in the later dreams correct the mistakes we have made in handling those that went before. We are also better able in a dream series to recognize the important contents and basic themes. Oh, so when you are writing your dream journal, make sure you also keep a record of your interpretations. And whatever comes to you as an interpretation is just as valuable as whatever other kind of meaning you can assign to it. And maybe you want to look at external sources for inspiration, what other people say, what this symbol means. So, in the later stages of analysis, Jung says, I let them work out the interpretations as well. So, yeah, you can do this for yourself because it is a process for yourself. And Jung is saying, you know what, the best therapist is someone who helps the patient become their own therapist, basically learn how to understand themselves. The patient learns in this way how to consult the unconscious without the doctor's help. This is really teaching a person to fish rather than giving them a fish. If dreams did nothing more than inform us about the causal factors in a neurosis, we could safely let the doctor handle them alone. It is probable that dreams contain more than practical helps for the doctor. And there can be really serious subject matter within them. I'll go full therapist mode. That's also detective while journaling. Wow, you're really dedicated to this. That's awesome. Yeah, it is a lot of work to do that, so I applaud you for wanting to put the effort in. Oh, so a colleague had a dream where they're climbing a mountain high over steep snow-covered slopes, and they climb higher and higher, and it's marvelous weather. The higher they climb, the better they feel, and they think, if only I could go on climbing like this forever. Oh, when I reach the summit, my happiness and elation are so strong that I feel I could mount right up into space. And I discover that I can actually do this. I go on climbing into empty air. So what Jung previously said, that it's really important to listen to your unconscious, your intuition, to whatever matter is contained in your dreams. Like, it was disturbing enough for this person to mention it to his associate. So whatever stands out to you, that's important. Oh. And he experiences this ecstasy. And Jung says to him, "My dear man, I know you can't give up mountaineering, but let me implore you not to go alone from now on." This is not a happy story. "When you go, take 2 guides, and you must promise on your word of honor to follow their directions." This guy didn't want to. Yeah, he got buried in an avalanche. Oh, he got buried in an avalanche, got pulled out. So that was his first warning. And then 3 months later, went climbing again with no guides. An alpinist standing below him saw him literally step out into the air as he was letting himself down a rock wall. Oh, this is so crazy. This is another predictive element. This is sad. Sad story. Oh. But we do know, we can deduce that this guy had an ego. Quite a big ego. Asked someone for help, didn't listen to their help. So I don't think you need to be anxious about examining your dreams for potential future disaster. I think we can live as peacefully as we can accomplish without adding further anxiety on top of what we already deal with. But it takes a lot of humility to have that level of self-reflection, so I'm not worried about you guys watching this video. I'm sure your desire to improve yourselves contains that level of humility, where you're willing to develop that skill of listening to yourself and listening to your intuition, which is invaluable. Often enough, dreams appear senseless, but it is obviously we who lack the sense and ingenuity to read the enigmatical message from the nocturnal realm of the psyche. No one doubts the importance of conscious experience. Why then should we question the importance of unconscious happenings? They also belong to human life. There is something more truly a part of it, for weal or woe, than any events of the day. Dreams give information about the secrets of the inner life and reveal to the dreamer hidden factors of his personality. As long as these are undiscovered, they disturb his waking life and betray themselves only in the form of symptoms. There is only one way of getting the treatment or the desired result. There must be a thoroughgoing conscious assimilation of unconscious contents, a mutual interpenetration of conscious and unconscious contents, and not just a one-sided evaluation, interpretation, and deformation of the unconscious contents by the conscious mind. So the conscious mind can downplay the unconscious contents. Yeah, it's easy enough to do. And, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, you're still allowed to doubt whatever intuition you get from your unconscious self. But just holding it as a possibility within your conscious mind, it can help you recognize patterns that play out in your life and help you have that level of awareness and saying, well, oh, this is what I'm doing, and this is the belief that it's affecting me in these different ways. Okay, so I'm going to end it there for tonight. So thank you, Ravina, for participating and making this really fun. And yeah, thank you for everyone who watches. Yeah, and so we'll continue this probably next Saturday, and I'll do another post about the time. Might try to do one earlier, about 5 p.m. if I can get an earlier time happening, and making sure that I'm being on time as well. I get home invasion dreams quite often. Is this just me, or can you relate? Ooh, a lack of security, as in emotionally. That is a great interpretation. And it could have multiple levels to it as well. Yeah, I haven't had home invasion dreams. Yeah, if we want to think about the home, there's that level of security. There is that level of protection. And I'm not sure. Definitely something to look at. Especially like you said, it's reoccurring as well. And I'm not trained as a therapist, so I also don't feel confident in analyzing someone else's like that for someone else, but I mean, also there could be other elements within the dream that give other clues as well. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, have a good night. Oh, that would be so cool, having really insightful dreams. Since you've decided to write down your dreams, I think I will write down my dreams as well. And I'm thinking of some dreams that I've had that I've just dismissed. And maybe I'll revisit that as well. And I think one of the things I might do is earlier, Jung specified different kinds of dreams, like the different kinds of meanings of dreams. Like they could be interpreting, like there's different things that we can interpret them as, right? So I think what I'll do is probably look at the different categories that he described and see, oh, well, does this fit into this category? And cool. Okay. Good night.